Our NewsNation Washington correspondents have more on the president's speech, the Democrats' response to it. You know, we've got you covered from all angles here. Tom Dempsey's at the Capitol. Hannah Brandt starts us off at the White House, though. Hannah, the president really trying to hammer home how much he's done to boost the economy.
Markie, absolutely. That was the overwhelming message in this speech. This was, as you said, the longest State of the Union ever. And as we expected, a large portion of it was revolving around the economy. In many ways, what we heard was a typical Trump speech. The president seemed to really rally all of those Republican lawmakers in the room. You saw them standing up, sitting down, a lot of applause, but he called out the Democrats. Right out of the gate, we heard the president really trying to sell Americans on what he's done so far on the economy. He says he's really transformed the American economy, and he blamed the prior administration for essentially messing it up, in his view. But the president not acknowledging the economic pain that polls really show most Americans are feeling right now when it comes to the cost of living. We know Republicans want to elevate a message of affordability, especially ahead of the ever-important midterms. And that theme was certainly central in the president's speech. He pointed to the tax cut policies, efforts to lower housing and prescription drug costs, though really his overarching message continued to be that the economy is already doing well under his leadership.
But in 12 months, my administration has driven core inflation down to the lowest level in more than 5 years. And in the last 3 months of 2025, it was down to 1.7%. Gasoline, which reached a peak of over $6 a gallon in some states under my predecessor, it was quite honestly a disaster, is now below $2.30 a gallon in most states, and in some places, $1.99 a gallon.
Another focal point that the president highlighted here were his immigration efforts. In one of those standout moments that was included in that highlight summary video at the top, you saw he told lawmakers they should stand if they believed it was the first duty of the American government to protect citizens, not illegal aliens. And only Republicans stood. So a divisive moment there, perhaps. But the president notably did not mention Minneapolis or the 2 Americans recently killed by federal officers there. And he really didn't do much to address American concerns that the Trump administration has just gone too far with deportation operations in American cities. Also, notably, not in the president's speech, any mention of the Epstein files. Markie?
With some of those victims in attendance last night as well. Hannah, we knew the economy was going to be the main focus last night, but with this massive military buildup happening near Iran, a lot of people across the country were specifically watching for any mention of that conflict. So was anything new shared on that front?
That's right, Markie. A lot of people were watching specifically to see if he'd announce any military action. That did not happen, but the president did talk about Iran. He said diplomacy is his preference here. He talked about the talks that are still happening, those ongoing nuclear discussions, and he really emphasized that he will not allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. He says Iranian leaders have not so far made satisfactory promises on that issue, and he essentially did threaten war in the Middle East if they don't, saying that he will never hesitate to confront threats to America. Also on that foreign policy front, I would note he highlighted the operation in Venezuela, that recent operation where we saw U.S. forces capture Nicolas Maduro. The president taking time during his speech to award a service member that was injured in that operation with a Congressional Medal of Honor. But, Markie, I also do want to add that that maybe wasn't the biggest medal moment of the night. By far, one of the most talked about tidbits from that speech, the moment generating the most buzz, was this, what you're seeing on your screen. When President Trump highlighted that gold medal winning Team USA men's hockey team, the president even announcing he's awarding the Presidential Medal of Freedom to the team's goalie. That's Connor Hellebuck. So a moment of patriotism and pride there, Markie.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.